The wind that evening was not just cold. It was mean. It cut right through clothes, no matter how many layers a person wore, found the skin underneath, making it feel tight and numb. Arthur pulled his collar up higher around his neck, but it didn't help much. The wool was old, thin from years of wear, and the dampness of the city air had settled deep into the fibers. He walked slowly, his shoes making a soft scraping sound against the concrete sidewalk. There was a rhythm to his step, a heaviness that came from walking miles with nowhere specific to go. He was not a young man. His face was a map of deep lines, each one telling a story of a hard winter or a sleepless night spent on a park bench. But his eyes were different. They were clear, bright, and held a spark that the street hadn't managed to put out yet. He carried himself with a quiet kind of dignity, even though his stomach was twisting itself into knots from hunger. It had been 2 days since he had eaten anything more than a few crusts of bread shared by a stranger near. The library steps. Arthur stopped in front of a large window. It was a restaurant, one of those places where the lights were always golden and inviting. Through the glass, he could see people sitting at round tables covered in white cloths. They were laughing, holding up glasses of red wine, and cutting into steaks that still sizzled. The steam from the food hit the glass and vanished, but to Arthur, it looked like a ghost of a meal. He didn't look at them with jealousy, though. He looked at them the way an artist looks at a painting. He saw the movement of their hands, the tilt of their heads, and the way they leaned in to listen to each other. He noticed the music playing inside, a soft jazz track that drifted out only when the heavy door opened. But his eyes moved past the people, past the waiters rushing around with silver trays balanced high on their hands. He was looking for the instrument. There it was, tucked into the corner near a large potted fern. It was a baby grand piano, polished to a shine so deep it looked like a black mirror. It was beautiful. But it was sad too. There were no candles on it, no sheet music open on the rack. It stood there, silent, like a person waiting for a dance partner who never arrives. They used it as a table for flower arrangements and empty desert glasses. Arthur felt a sharp tug in his chest. It was an ache that had nothing to do with the empty feeling in his belly. For a moment, he remembered how it felt to sit on a bench like that. He remembered the smell of wood and varnish, the cool touch of the ivory keys under his fingertips, and the vibration that hummed up through the floorboards when the pedals were pressed. He remembered being younger, wearing a tuxedo that fit perfectly, and playing in halls so big you could whisper and hear it echo back 3 seconds later. That life felt like a dream he had woken up from a long time ago, leaving only the cold morning air as reality. A gust of wind blew a discarded newspaper against his legs, snapping him back to the present. Arthur shivered. The warmth coming from the vent near the door felt amazing on his face. He closed his eyes for just a second, letting the heat soak in. He knew he couldn't stand there all night. Eventually, a security guard would come by, or the staff would see him and ask him to move along. He was used to it. He was part of the scenery of the city, something people tried not to look at too directly. But the hunger was getting worse. It was a sharp pain now, cramping his side. He looked down at his hands. They were rough, the skin dry and cracked, but the fingers were long and slender. They were hands that were built to create, to move fast and light across the keys. He balled them into fists and shoved them deep into his coat pockets. His fingers brushed against a few coins, maybe 40 cents total. It wasn't enough. It wasn't nearly enough. Arthur looked back at the piano. He watched a waiter walk past it, bumping the edge with a tray full of dirty dishes. The waiter didn't even pause. He didn't apologize to the instrument. He just kept moving. It made Arthur angry in a quiet way. It felt disrespectful to treat something so powerful like a piece of furniture. He knew what that piano could sound like if someone treated it right. He knew the songs it could sing. He looked at the sign above the door. The Gilded Fork. It looked fancy, expensive. Definitely not the kind of place where someone in his condition was welcome. Usually, he would keep walking. He would find a deli where the sandwich maker might slip him an extra roll. Or he would wait behind a bakery for the day-old bread. But tonight was different. The cold was sharper, and the hunger was louder. And that piano was calling to him. He thought about his father. His father had taught him that music wasn't just a hobby. It was a language. It was how you spoke when words were too clumsy. Never trade your skill for a cheap price, his father used to say. But his father had never gone 3 days without eating. Arthur took a deep breath. He felt a tremor in his hands, but it wasn't from the cold this time. It was fear. He was afraid of being ignored. He was afraid of being laughed at. He was afraid of seeing that look in people's eyes, the one that said he was nothing, he was invisible, that he didn't matter. But he was more afraid of the freezing night and the gnawing emptiness inside him. He reached for the door handle. It was brass, heavy and cold. He hesitated. Through the glass, the world looked so happy, so far away from his reality. He saw a young woman feeding a small child a piece of chocolate cake. He saw an old man pouring wine for his wife. They were safe. They were warm. He was just a ghost on the other side of the glass. Just one song, he whispered to himself. The words were barely audible, lost in the sound of the traffic zooming by on the street. If I can play, surely a meal isn't too much to ask. He didn't want money. He didn't want a handout. He wanted a trade. He had a skill, something of value that he could give. He wanted to earn his dinner with the only thing he had left. It was a matter of pride. It was a way to tell himself that he wasn't just a homeless man, that he was still a musician. Even if the audience had shrunk to just the people eating their steaks, Arthur pulled the handle. The door swung open, and a wave of noise and smell hit him all at once. The smell of garlic butter, grilled meat, and fresh coffee. The sound of clinking silverware, low chatter, and soft laughter. The air inside was thick and warm. He stepped inside, his worn shoes making no sound on the plush carpet. He let the door close behind him, shutting out the wind. He stood just inside the entrance, feeling the heat seep into his coat. People glanced at him, then quickly looked away, turning back to their meals. He was out of place here. His coat was dusty, his hair uncombed. He stuck out like a sore thumb. He felt small under the high ceilings and the bright chandeliers. He didn't move toward a table. He stood there, waiting, gathering his courage. He looked toward the bar area, where the staff seemed to be gathering. A man in a white shirt with a black apron was polishing glasses, looking busy and important. That was the person, Arthur decided. That was the one who had the power to say yes or no. His heart hammered against his ribs, harder than it had when he was walking in the wind. This was it, the moment of truth. He was about to ask a room full of strangers to let him play, to trust him, to listen to him. He was about to offer them his soul in exchange for a bowl of soup. He straightened his back as best he could. He ran a hand quickly through his hair, trying to make it somewhat presentable. He looked at the piano one last time, sitting silently in the corner waiting for him. Okay, Arthur thought, taking a small step forward. Here we go. Arthur walked slowly toward the front desk. His heart was beating so hard he could feel it in his throat. Every step he took on the thick carpet felt heavy, like his shoes were made of lead. The restaurant was louder than it looked from the outside. There was a constant hum of people talking, the clinking of glasses, and the sound of knives hitting plates. It was the sound of a happy, full world, a world that felt very far away from the empty, cold street he had just walked off. He kept his head down, but his eyes up, scanning the room. He felt incredibly out of place. Everyone here looked clean and neat. The men had nice jackets and shaved faces. The women wore bright colors and smelled like expensive flowers. Arthur looked down at his own coat. It was stained with mud from the sidewalk and smelled faintly of damp wool. He pulled the sides of it tighter around himself, trying to hide his shirt, which wasn't as clean as it used to be. He felt like a speck of dirt on a clean painting. The man behind the stand was tall and broad. He had a neatly trimmed beard and was wearing a suit that probably cost more than Arthur had earned in the last 10 years. This man, whose name was Sam, was busy writing things down in a book and checking a computer screen. He looked stressed, but in control, like a captain steering a ship. Arthur stopped a few feet away from him. He waited to be acknowledged, but Sam didn't look up. He just kept writing. A young couple walked up to the desk then, laughing about a joke the man had made. Sam immediately smiled his professional customer service smile and greeted them warmly. He took their names and led them away to a table, leaving Arthur standing alone by the wooden podium. Arthur didn't move. He just stood there, feeling his hands get sweaty inside his pockets. He watched the room. Near the bar, a young bartender with a fast smile was mixing drinks. He was throwing ice into glasses and spinning bottles around, showing off for the customers. A few waitresses zoomed by, carrying heavy trays, shouting orders to the kitchen staff. They all moved so fast. They all had a purpose. Arthur felt like a stone in a flowing river, unmoving while everyone else rushed past. Finally, Sam came back to the stand. He let out a long breath and smoothed down his tie. It was only then that he noticed Arthur standing there. Sam's smile didn't disappear exactly, but it changed. It became tighter, colder. It was the look people give when they see something they don't want to deal with. "Can I help you?" Sam asked. His voice wasn't mean, but it was firm. It was the voice you use to tell a dog to get off the couch. Arthur cleared his throat. It felt dry and scratchy, like he had swallowed sandpaper. He tried to stand up straighter, to look Sam in the eye, but he felt small. He was aware of the people sitting nearby starting to glance over. He could feel their eyes on him, wondering why a homeless man was standing at the host stand of a fancy restaurant. "I hope I am not disturbing you," Arthur began. His voice was quiet, shaky. "I saw the piano in the corner." Sam looked confused. He glanced back at the piano, then at Arthur. "Okay, what about it?" Arthur swallowed hard. He knew how this sounded. He knew how crazy it must seem to these people. He looked down at his worn shoes for a second, then forced himself to look back at the manager. "I haven't eaten in 2 days," Arthur said. The words rushed out of him, tumbling over each other. "But I am a pianist. I used to play for a living. I saw your piano, and it looks like a fine instrument. It is gathering a bit of dust, and, well, I was wondering if I could play for you. Not for money. Just for a meal? Maybe some soup. I could play while people eat. It would be nice background music." There was a moment of silence. It wasn't a long moment, but to Arthur, it felt like an hour. Sam stared at him with his eyebrows raised. He looked Arthur up and down, taking in the dirty coat, the messy hair, and the shaking hands. He didn't see a master musician. He just saw an old man who was confused, or perhaps looking for a handout. Before Sam could say anything, a loud laugh burst out from the bar area. It was the young bartender, a guy named Tyler who had been spinning the bottles. He had overheard Arthur's request. He thought he had misheard, or maybe he just thought it was the funniest thing he had heard all week. He leaned over the bar, a glass towel in his hand, and grinned. "Play for dinner?" Tyler called out, his voice loud and full of amusement. "Are you serious, pal? We have a stereo system for that. We don't need a street show." Few of the customers at the bar chuckled. A waitress carrying a tray of empty glasses smiled nervously, looking between Arthur and her boss. The laughter wasn't cruel, exactly. It was just casual. It was the laughter of people who felt safe inside their warm bubble, looking at someone who was stuck outside in the cold. They didn't know Arthur. They didn't know his past. They only saw what was right in front of them. Arthur felt his face get hot. A wave of shame washed over him, starting at his neck and going up to his ears. He looked down at his feet. He had expected a no. He had expected them to tell him to leave. But he hadn't expected to be laughed at. That hurt more than the hunger. "I am very good," Arthur said softly, trying one last time. He wasn't begging for money. He was begging for a chance to prove he still existed, that he still had worth. "I know many songs. Classical jazz, old standards. I wouldn't disturb anyone." Sam sighed. He rubbed the back of his neck. He didn't want to be mean, but he had a business to run. He couldn't have some random stranger coming in off the street, touching the expensive equipment, and bothering the customers who were paying a lot of money for a quiet dinner. "Look," Mr. Sam said, his voice gentle but final. "I appreciate the offer. I do. But we can't just let anyone sit down and play. That piano is for decoration mostly. And even if it wasn't, we have strict rules. I can't have you in here bothering the guests. It's nothing personal. It's for dinner," Arthur whispered. "Just a plate. Doesn't matter," Sam said. He pointed a finger toward the door, not aggressively, but like a traffic cop directing traffic. "There's a shelter a few blocks down on 4th Street. They serve hot meals at 6. You should go there. They can help you better than I can." Arthur stood there for a moment. The laughter from the bartender had faded away into low murmurs, but the sting of it was still there. He looked past Sam toward the corner again. The piano sat there, silent and dark. It looked lonely to him. He knew that if he could just sit there for 5 minutes, he could change their minds. He knew he could make them stop talking. He knew he could make them feel something, but he saw the look in Sam's eyes. It was a look that said the conversation was over. It was a look that said Arthur didn't belong here and never would. "Okay," Arthur said quietly. "I understand. Thank you for your time." He didn't argue. He didn't get angry. He just turned around slowly. He felt smaller now than he had when he walked in. The warmth of the restaurant didn't feel welcoming anymore. It felt suffocating. He could feel the eyes of the diners on his back as he walked away. They were watching to see if the old homeless man was going to cause a scene. He walked past the bar. Tyler was busy pouring a beer and didn't even look up. Arthur walked past the tables where people were eating their steaks and laughing. He felt like a ghost drifting through a party he wasn't invited to. He reached the large glass door. He could see the street outside. The wind was still howling, and the rain was starting to fall, streaking against the glass. It looked freezing out there. A part of him just wanted to push the door open and run back into the dark. To disappear into the shadows where nobody could laugh at him. It would be easier. It would be safer. He put his hand on the handle. The metal was cold against his palm. He was about to push it, to step back out into the nothingness of the night. But then he stopped. He looked back one last time. He looked at the piano. He remembered the feeling of his mother's hand on his shoulder when he was a little boy, telling him that music was the only thing that could truly heal a heart. He remembered the applause he used to get. He remembered the feeling of being good at something. His hand dropped from the door handle. He made a fist. He took a deep, shaky breath. "No," he whispered to himself. He wasn't going to leave. Not yet. He couldn't leave like this, with their laughter being the last thing he heard. He had one more chance. He just had to find the right words. He had to make them see him, not the coat, not the dirt, but the man inside. He turned around, facing the busy room again. He squared his shoulders. He walked back toward the manager, who was already looking annoyed that he hadn't left yet. Arthur stopped walking. He stood right in the middle of the busy path between the tables, forcing the manager to look at him again. The noise of the restaurant seemed to get quieter. Or maybe his blood was just pounding so hard in his ears that he couldn't hear the clinking silverware anymore. He knew that if he walked out that door, he would disappear, not just into the night, but into himself. He would become just another old man who gave up. He didn't want to be that man. He looked at the manager. Sam. Sam was looking at his watch now, a clear sign that he was losing patience. But Arthur didn't rush this time. He didn't stammer or look at his shoes. He took a deep breath, filling his lungs with the warm, garlic-scented air. When he spoke, his voice was different. It wasn't the raspy whisper of a beggar. It was low, steady, and clear. It carried the weight of a person who was used to being listened to, even if it had been years since anyone actually listened. "Sir," Arthur said. The word cut through the noise. "I understand your position. I understand that I look like a problem to you. I understand that I am not tidy." Sam paused, his hand halfway to his tie. He looked surprised by the change in Arthur's demeanor. The old man's posture had changed, too. He wasn't hunched over anymore. He stood with his back straight, his shoulders back. It was the posture of a soldier or a gentleman. "I am not asking for charity," Arthur continued, his eyes locking onto Sam's. "And I am not asking for a job. I am asking for a trade, fair exchange, value for value." He pointed a long, slender finger toward the dark corner where the baby grand sat silently. "That instrument over there. It is a wonderful piece of craftsmanship, but it is lonely. It is sitting in the corner like a flower in a vase without water. It needs to breathe. I can help it breathe." Sam let out a frustrated sigh. "Pal, I told you." "We don't need just one song," Arthur interrupted him. Wasn't rude, but it was firm. He raised one hand slightly, palm out, as if to stop the rejection. Give me one song. If the patrons complain, if anyone puts down their fork and looks annoyed, or if you simply don't like what you hear, I will leave. I won't say another word. I will go out into the cold, and you will never see me again. Sam frowned, crossed his arms over his chest. He looked around the restaurant. People were eating. The atmosphere was calm. Letting a homeless man bang on the piano seemed like a recipe for disaster. He was about to say no, to wave him off again. But Arthur added quickly, sensing the hesitation, if you like it, if the people enjoy it, I ask for a bowl of soup and a roll of bread. That is all. A bowl of soup for 3 minutes of music. He let the offer hang in the air. It was a gamble. It's a massive, terrifying gamble. But it was the only chip he had left to play. Sam looked at Arthur, really looked at him for the first time. He saw the dirt on the coat, yes, but he also saw the intensity in the old man's eyes. There was a fire there, a strange, burning confidence that didn't match the rags he was wearing. Sam had managed restaurants for 20 years. He knew how to read people. He knew when someone was lying to get a free drink, and he knew when someone was desperate. This man wasn't lying, okay? Sam said slowly. The word hung in the air. One song. That's it. And if you touch a glass, or bother a customer, or if you sound terrible, you're out. No arguing. Arthur felt a surge of relief wash over him, so strong it almost made his knees buckle. He didn't smile, but he gave a small, sharp nod. Agreed. He walked toward the piano. It felt like the longest walk of his life. He could feel every eye in the restaurant on him. The patrons had stopped eating. The waiters had stopped rushing. Even the bartender, Tyler, had stopped spinning a towel over his head to watch. It was a strange spectacle, frail old man in a tattered coat walking toward a gleaming, expensive instrument like he was approaching a throne. When he reached the piano, he didn't sit down immediately. He reached out and touched the smooth black wood. His hand trembled, just for a second, as he made contact. It was cold to the touch, solid and real. He ran his fingers along the curve, feeling the vibration of the room. He carefully took off his coat. It was a heavy, ugly thing, but it was his shield against the world. He folded it neatly, draping it over the bench. Underneath, he was wearing a white dress shirt. It was yellowing at the armpits, and the cuffs were frayed, but it had once been a fine shirt. You could still see the lines where it had been ironed carefully, perhaps weeks ago. He sat down on the bench. It felt firm and comfortable. He adjusted the height, sliding forward slightly. He was no longer Arthur the homeless man. He was Arthur the pianist. The change was physical. His back straightened until it was perfectly rigid. His shoulders dropped, relaxing completely. His hands, which had been balled into fists in his pockets, rose up and hovered over the keys. They were elegant hands. Long, spider-like fingers with prominent knuckles. The skin was dry and spotted with age, but they were strong hands. Hands that had typed thousands of letters and played millions of notes. He placed his left foot on the sustain pedal. He pressed it down gently, just an inch, testing the resistance. It felt good, felt responsive. The restaurant was dead silent now. It was eerie. The only sound was the low hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen and the distant noise of traffic from outside. People were watching, confused. Was he really going to play? Was this a joke? Was he going to start pounding out chopsticks or bang on the keys like a child? Tyler, the bartender, leaned over to a waitress and whispered, $5 as he falls off the bench. The waitress shushed him, looking uneasy. She couldn't take her eyes off the old man's hands. They were poised so gracefully, like a bird about to take flight. Arthur closed his eyes for a brief second. He blocked out the smell of the steak. He blocked out the stares of the rich people, forgot about the hunger gnawing at his stomach and the cold wind waiting outside. He thought only of the music, thought of the song he was about to play. It was a song of sadness, but also of hope. It was a song that said, I am here, I have suffered, but I am still standing. He took a breath. Then his fingers descended. They didn't strike the keys. They kissed them. The first chord rang out, clear as a bell. It was a deep, rich E-flat minor. It filled the room instantly. The sound wasn't just loud. It was heavy. It had weight to it, vibrated in the glasses on the tables and rattled the silverware. The chatter that had started to bubble died instantly. Arthur's hands moved. It didn't look like he was trying to play. It looked like the music was already inside him, pouring out of his fingers. He was just the channel. His left hand played a rolling rhythm, a gentle wave-like motion that seemed to pull the listeners forward. His right hand played the melody, weaving high, sweet notes that danced above the rhythm. He wasn't playing a simple tune. He was playing chop. It was complex and intricate. The notes ran together like water, fast and fluid, then suddenly slow and mournful. The reaction was immediate. A man near the window froze with his fork halfway to his mouth. He forgot to chew. A woman dropped her napkin but didn't bend to pick it up. She just stared, her mouth slightly open. The bartender, Tyler, stopped wiping the counter. He stood frozen, the towel hanging limp in his hand. The sound coming from the corner was not what they expected. It wasn't noise. It was beautiful. It was heartbreakingly beautiful. Wow. The tone was perfect, the timing precise. It sounded like a recording, except it was live, and it was happening right there in front of them, played by a man they had laughed at only minutes before. Arthur didn't see any of this. His eyes were half closed, looking at nothing but the black and white keys. He was lost in the music. For the first time in years, he felt warm, felt complete. He wasn't a beggar anymore. He was a master, and the whole room was his audience. The sound that filled the restaurant didn't just bounce off the walls. It seemed to soak into them. It was a sound so pure and rich that it made the air feel heavier, like the atmosphere in a cathedral. As Arthur's fingers moved across the keys, the transformation in the room was nothing short of a miracle. It wasn't a slow fade of noise. It was an abrupt, snapping silence. People stopped chewing. Glasses paused halfway to lips. The waiter, who had been rushing toward the kitchen with a tray of dirty dishes, froze in the middle of the aisle, his eyes wide, staring at the corner. He didn't care that the dishes might get cold. He couldn't move. The aggressive laughter from the bar had vanished completely, placed by a stunned quiet that felt sacred. Arthur was no longer sitting in a corner of the gilded fork. In his mind, the walls had melted away. The smell of garlic and butter was gone, replaced by the memory of polished wood and old velvet curtains. He wasn't wearing a torn shirt. He was wearing his tuxedo. He wasn't playing for a bowl of soup. He was playing for a sold-out hall in Vienna, or maybe for the ghosts of his past. The hunger that had been twisting his stomach like a knife seemed to dissolve, replaced by a rush of energy that he hadn't felt in decades. The melody he played. Chopin's Nocturne is a piece that demands emotion. It cannot be played correctly with just technical skill. It requires the player to pour their soul into the keys. And Arthur was pouring everything he had. He played the low notes with a heaviness that spoke of his weary years on the street, of the cold nights and the loneliness. Then his right hand would leap up the keyboard, playing the high notes with a lightness that sounded like hope, like a bird flying up into a clear blue sky. It was a conversation between sorrow and joy. Happening in real time, the bartender, Tyler, stood behind the mahogany bar with a dish rag in his hand. He was a young man who thought he knew everything about city life. He thought he had seen every type of person, the rich snobs, the broke students, the street performers who played badly on subway trains. But he had never heard anything like this. He looked at the old man's hands. He couldn't believe that those weathered, wrinkled fingers could move so fast. They were a blur of motion, striking the keys with precision that seemed machine-like, yet produced a sound that was deeply human. Tyler felt a strange tightness in his chest. He looked around and saw that the customers were mesmerized. A businessman in an expensive gray suit, who had been shouting on his cell phone 5 minutes ago, was now staring open-mouthed at the piano, his phone forgotten on the table. A young couple on a date stopped holding hands and just leaned in toward the music, as if they were trying to catch every whisper of the sound. This wasn't background music. You couldn't ignore this. It demanded your full attention. It forced you to stop thinking about your steak, your taxes, or your job, and just feel. It was the kind of music that made people remember things they had tried to forget: a lost love, a childhood home, a dream they gave up on. Sam, the manager, stood near the host stand. His arms were crossed, but he had dropped his tough, defensive posture. His jaw wasn't set tight anymore. It was hanging loose. He watched Arthur, really looking at him for the first time. He saw the way Arthur's eyes were closed, the way his head swayed slightly with the rhythm. This wasn't an act. This wasn't a circus trick to get a free meal. This was a master at work. Sam realized with a sudden jolt of shame that he had almost thrown this man out into the rain. He had treated a rare diamond like a piece of worthless glass. The music reached a climax. Arthur's left hand thundered a deep, rolling bass, while his right hand cascaded down the keys in a shower of sparkling notes. It was a sound of weeping, but weeping that was beautiful. It was the sound of rain falling on a roof when you are safe inside. It was the sound of grief that has finally been accepted. In that moment, Arthur looked powerful. He wasn't a frail, homeless man begging for scraps. He was a giant. The energy radiating from him was palpable. He controlled the mood of every single person in the room with the press of a pedal. He held them in the palm of his hand. As the song neared its end, the tempo slowed. The rushing notes calmed down, turning into gentle, singular chords that echoed in the silence. The final note was soft, barely a whisper, but it rang out clearly. Arthur held his hands over the keys for a moment after he stopped, letting the vibration of the string fade into nothingness then. He lowered his hands to his lap. He sat there, head bowed, his shoulders slumping forward as the energy left him. The spell broke, but the silence remained. It was a heavy, thick silence. No one spoke for at least 5 seconds. It was as if the entire room was holding its breath, afraid that if they made a sound, the magic would disappear. Then a sound came from the back of the room. It was the clink of a spoon against a glass, but it wasn't an accident. It was a signal. An older man with white hair stood up. He had been eating a quiet dinner alone. Now he was applauding. Slowly at first, but then with force. "Bravo," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Bravo." That started the wave. One by one, other diners stood up. The young couple stood. The businessman stood. Soon, the whole restaurant was on its feet. The applause wasn't polite clapping. It was loud, thunderous, and enthusiastic. It was the sound of people who had been moved, who knew they had witnessed something special. Arthur didn't turn around. He stayed facing the piano, his back to the room. He was afraid to look. He couldn't believe that the sound was for him. He thought for a second that maybe a famous musician had walked in, or that they were clapping for something else. It had been so long since anyone had clapped for him that he didn't know how to accept it. Sam walked over to the piano. His face was red, and his eyes were wet. He didn't say anything at first. He just reached out and placed a hand gently on Arthur's shoulder. Arthur flinched slightly, then turned around. He saw the room full of people standing. He saw the smiles. He saw the tears in some eyes. And he saw Sam, the manager who had wanted to kick him out. Looking at him with total respect, the bartender Tyler came out from behind the bar. He walked up to the edge of the small stage area, not carrying a tray or a glass. He looked at Arthur, shook his head in disbelief, and just whispered, "Wow." The waitress who had smiled awkwardly earlier was standing nearby, wiping her eyes with a napkin. "I didn't know," she said to no one in particular. "He plays like an angel." Arthur looked at them all, his eyes wide. He saw that they weren't looking at a homeless man anymore. They were looking at the music. They were looking at the part of him that had survived the streets, the cold, and the hunger. The invisible man had vanished. In his place was a master who had finally been heard. He slowly stood up from the bench. He felt weak, but it was a good kind of weak. He felt light. He looked at Sam and offered a small, tentative smile. He was ready to leave, thinking his bargain was done. He had played, they had liked it, and now he would quietly go and wait for his soup outside. Or perhaps they would just hand him a paper bag at the door. He didn't know that his life was about to change again. He didn't know that the music had done more than just stop the noise. It had opened their hearts. The staff, the customers, the manager, they were all connected now, tied together by the melody of a man they had underestimated. The laughter was gone, replaced by a profound silence that spoke louder than words ever could. Arthur waited, shifting his weight from foot to foot, wondering what happened next. The applause didn't stop. It rolled through the room like a long thunderstorm that you didn't want to end. People were clapping, some were whistling, and a few were even wiping their eyes with the rough white paper napkins that sat on the tables. It was the kind of noise that usually only happened in concert halls, not in a busy steakhouse on a Tuesday night. Arthur stood by the bench, gripping the wooden edge with one hand to steady himself. He felt dizzy, but not from hunger this time. He felt lightheaded from the sheer shock of it all. He looked at the sea of faces looking back at him. Just 10 minutes ago, they had looked through him as if he were made of glass. Now, their eyes were wide, their smiles genuine, their attention locked entirely on him. He tried to process what was happening. He wanted to say thank you, but his throat felt tight and the words seemed stuck. He gave a small, awkward nod of his head instead. He expected that to be the end of it. He had played his song. He had proved he could do it. He thought Sam would come over, hand him a paper bag with a takeout container, and show him the door. He was ready to go back into the shadows. He was used to the shadows. But Sam didn't have a bag. He didn't point to the door. Sam stepped up onto the small raised platform where the piano sat. He signaled for the room to quiet down. It took a moment, but the clapping faded into a buzzing, expectant silence. Sam looked out at his customers, then turned to Arthur. He didn't look like a manager talking to a troublemaker anymore. He looked like a man meeting a long-lost friend. "Don't go anywhere," Sam said softly, just loud enough for Arthur to hear. Then he turned to the staff, raising his voice slightly. "Tyler, clear off that table in the corner. The one by the window. The round one." Tyler, the bartender, moved fast. He didn't roll his eyes or sigh. He practically jumped over the bar, grabbing a clean cloth. He rushed to a table that was usually reserved for VIPs or big groups. He swept the crumbs away in one motion and polished the table until it shined. He even adjusted the centerpiece, making sure the candle was straight. Sam gestured toward the table with an open palm. "Please," he said to Arthur. "Sit here." Arthur hesitated. He looked down at his dirty coat, which he was still holding over his arm. "Sir," he whispered, "I can't. I don't belong here. People are eating. You belong here more than anyone else tonight," Sam said firmly. There was no arguing in his voice. It was an order, but a kind one. Sam turned and walked toward the kitchen, disappearing through the swinging double doors. The room felt strange. The waitstaff, who had been ignoring Arthur earlier, were now watching him with reverence. The waitress, who had looked uncomfortable earlier, walked up to him. She didn't ask him for an order. She gently pulled out the plush velvet chair at the table. "Here," she said softly. "Please, sit down. You must be tired." Arthur looked at her, then at the chair. He felt a wave of emotion that almost knocked him over. He was painfully aware of the smell of the street on his clothes. He was worried about dirtying the fabric. But he was also exhausted deep down in his bones. Slowly, carefully, he sat down. It was the softest chair he had felt in years. He placed his coat on the empty chair next to him. He sat up straight, feeling out of place. Like a rusted old coin sitting in a pile of shiny gold, Sam returned from the kitchen, but he wasn't carrying a bowl of soup. He was carrying a tray loaded with food. There was a bowl of steaming onion soup, covered in melted cheese. There was a plate of roast chicken, with mashed potatoes and green beans, still hot and sizzling. There was a basket of warm bread rolls with a small dish of butter, and there was a glass of red wine. Sam placed the tray on the table and set the plate in front of Arthur. The smell hit Arthur instantly. It was rich and savory, a smell that made his stomach growl so loudly he was sure the whole room could hear. A few people nearby smiled kindly at the noise. This is too much," Arthur stammered, looking at the feast. "I only asked for soup." "A bowl you played for us," Sam said, standing next to the table. "You gave us something beautiful. You can't put a price on that. This is the least we can do." Arthur looked at the food, then up at Sam. His eyes were watery. "I don't have any money," he whispered. "I can't pay for this." Sam shook his head. "You already paid." "You paid with the music? Eat, my friend. You're safe here." The bartender, Tyler, walked over to the table. He didn't have his usual cocky grin. He looked a little shy. He placed a small glass of water next to the wine. "I'm sorry I laughed earlier," Tyler said, looking Arthur in the eye. "I didn't know. I really didn't know. It was a simple apology, but it meant the world. It was the bridge between the world of the bartender and the world of the homeless man." Arthur nodded. "It is okay," he said. "I am used to it, but thank you." The room seemed to relax then. The magic of the moment had settled into a warm, comfortable atmosphere. It wasn't just about the piano anymore. It was about the people. The diners went back to their meals, but the vibe was different. They were quieter, more thoughtful. They weren't just eating. They were appreciating. Arthur picked up his fork. His hand was shaking again, but this time it was because he was overwhelmed. He took a bite of the chicken. It was tender and juicy, seasoned with herbs. It tasted like heaven. He took a bite of the mashed potatoes, creamy and buttery. He hadn't tasted food like this in a lifetime. He chewed slowly, closing his eyes, savoring every bite. As he ate, he watched the room. He looked at the piano sitting in the corner. It wasn't lonely anymore. It was just a piano waiting for the next song. But Arthur knew he had woken it up. He ate about half of the food. It was so much food that he couldn't finish it, even though he wanted to. His stomach, which had been empty for so long, couldn't handle too much at once. He sat back in the chair, taking a sip of the wine. It was smooth and warm. He felt the heat spreading through his body, chasing away the last of the cold shivers he had carried in from the street. Sam came back to check on him. "Is everything okay?" "It is perfect," Arthur said. "It is the best meal of my life." "No," Sam said, leaning in slightly. "We have that piano. We hardly ever use it. It just sits there. If you ever need a meal, or if you just want to play, you come back. You don't have to stand at the door and beg. You just walk in like you own the place." Arthur looked at him, stunned. "You would let me play? Even looking like this?" "Especially looking like this," Sam said with a smile. "We don't care about the clothes. We care about the music. And frankly, the customers love it." The old man who had started the applause earlier walked over to the table. He was a distinguished gentleman with a silver mustache. He stopped at Arthur's table. "I just wanted to shake your hand," he said, extending his hand. "I haven't heard Chopin played with that much emotion since I was a boy in Paris." "Thank you." Arthur shook the man's hand, feeling a little bashful. "Thank you for listening," Arthur replied. The man reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card and a crisp bill, which he tucked under the edge of Arthur's plate. "If you ever give lessons, or if you play a gig somewhere, please let me know. I would love to hear you play again." Arthur looked at the card, then at the man, and nodded. "I will." For the next hour, Arthur didn't leave. He sat at the table, sipping his water and watching the room. A few other customers came by to say a quick kind word or just a nod at him. He wasn't invisible anymore. He was part of the fabric of the restaurant. He was the master pianist who had walked in off the street. Eventually it was time for him to go. He knew he couldn't stay forever. He had his routine, and the city was still out there waiting. He stood up and put his tattered coat back on. It felt heavy again, but it didn't feel like a burden now. It felt like a coat. Sam walked him to the door. "You sure you have to go?" "Yes," Arthur said. "But I will remember this." "You take care of yourself," Sam said, opening the heavy door. The cold night air rushed in, but Arthur didn't shiver. He felt warm from the inside out. He turned and looked at Sam one last time. "Thank you," Arthur said. "For the food, but mostly for listening." Sam smiled. "We'll be waiting for the next song." Arthur stepped out onto the sidewalk. The streetlights were yellow and hazy. The cars were zooming by. The wind was still blowing. But to Arthur, the street looked different. It didn't look like a place of hopelessness anymore. It looked like a place where he had something to offer. He walked away from the restaurant, his hands in his pockets, humming the melody of the song he had just played. He walked a little taller, his step a little lighter. He knew that tomorrow might be hard. He knew the hunger might come back. But he also knew that he still had his music. And tonight, in a warm restaurant full of strangers, His music had made him a king as he disappeared into the darkness of the city. The sound of the piano lingered in the air of the gilded fork, a gentle reminder that sometimes the most beautiful things come from the places you least expect.